In this video, we will cover how it's possible to leverage Agile principles in the highly regulated life sciences industry. The value of this presentation for anyone who doesn't operate in this type of environment would be to see how we can implement Agile to the right degree necessary in order to make it effective within a specific perspective. Additionally, it provides an example for one way that we can combine both plan and change-based approaches, which are both described in the IIBA Business Analysis body of knowledge. In my previous presentation on what is computer system validation, it's apparent that following this process would lend itself to a waterfall approach. However, there are challenges with following a strict waterfall methodology. First, the problem with this approach is that the business may not get a chance to actually use the system until formal user acceptance testing. Next, users may not know what requirements they really need until they actually see the system and use it to perform day-in-the-life tasks. Also, delaying this level of hands-on interaction increases the risk of changes late in the implementation cycle, which creates a cascading effect. And finally, if the system must be modified to accommodate new requirements, then lost time and increased cost results if previously developed work is changed or removed. On the flip side, we know that some of the key benefits of using Agile include a shorter delivery cycle so that time is saved going from concept to delivery. It enables ongoing communications with the business. Frequent demonstrations generates new ideas for the next sprint. We adapt and update as we go along to ensure that what's being delivered provides optimal value and provides the ability to respond to changing and evolving business needs. So how can we leverage this in an environment that comes with a very well structured and defined process which mandates documentation in a specific order? Ultimately, what it comes down to is leveraging and incorporating certain elements of Agile in a creative way to help us capture requirements, elicit iterative feedback, and perform ongoing testing, and then use what we've come away with as input into our formal validation process. Ideally, execution should then go much smoother because of all of the upfront work that was done in each of our iterative phases. Next, we'll cover the three main situations that I've been involved with when it comes to solution deployments in a highly regulated pharmaceutical environment, what the constraints and challenges were, and how we solved for them. One thing I want to point out is that the issue isn't with having a formal SDLC. In regulated environments, it's all there for a good reason. The challenge comes down to having a good process for eliciting and verifying the right requirements, because reliance on understanding system functions for meeting business needs when using large text-based requirements documents defined up front is too complicated and nebulous for users to comprehend. While a functional spec is a required validation deliverable and does have value in terms of prioritizing, organizing, and capturing all requirements in one place, as well as a means of tracing to test scripts, on its own, it's not an ideal tool for BAs to use to elicit the right requirements. What users state what they want may not be ultimately what they need, because defining requirements tends to be an evolutionary process. A well-formed functional spec does not optimize business value if it doesn't properly reflect requirements that meet the business need. Next, we will cover different examples of implementation scenarios within a pharmaceutical environment, the challenges with each scenario, and real-world solutions that have been applied to meet these challenges. The first scenario is new product that's internally developed. The constraints are an organization's rigid SDLC requires formal documentation to all be approved in a specific order prior to formal testing in a controlled environment. Challenges might be an expectation for the business analyst to author required documentation, receive formal approval of text-based requirements, avoid reapproval cycles due to issues found during formal testing, and prevent major gaps in formal user acceptance testing, which would result in expensive change controls, thereby causing project delays and cost overruns. Standard sprint cycles can be incorporated as part of the application development process. For example, in Sprint 0, we collect requirements for a feature and then pass this to the development team for Sprint 1. During Sprint 0, the development team is forming and getting things set up while they wait for work to be completed during the initial requirements definition. At the end of Sprint 0, the business analyst passes along initially agreed upon requirements for a feature. The development team uses this as a baseline for Sprint 1. And the development team will finish the feature based on the initial agreement at the end of Sprint 1. At that point, they will show the delivered code based on the requirements from this first sprint. The business provides feedback during the demo since they are the primary audience, and if changes are requested during Sprint 1, then they will initiate new work for Sprint 2 for those changes. So how do we go about integrating our testing in all of this? Within the team, there is a system tester. They are seeing the mockups being created and they are looking at the requirements being drafted. They're also attending the daily stand-ups to understand what the developers are incrementally building. They start writing the automated test cases based on the information provided. By the time the demo happens, they've already written a sizable portion of automation testing for it, since they've already been involved by working in parallel. They verify with the team what's to complete during the demo. Subsequently, they finalize the automated test cases. They might need a few more days to finalize after the sprint demo due to information received from the demo, but once the feedback is finalized, they can then run automated testing for that feature. For each new sprint, they will now have the ability to run automated regression testing. This is done to make sure that one feature did not break another feature, and a key reason why we continuously build automated test cases. And automated testing typically runs overnight, so by the next morning, the development team can see if anything has failed. So let's see what this looks like when we put it all together. In this example, we have 2 epics, and each epic is broken down into respective sprints. Prior to each sprint, we capture our user stories for the upcoming sprint. Then during development, in parallel, we can start drafting the functional specification, automated test scripts, and capture user stories for the next sprint. At the end of each sprint, we demo what we've accomplished to our users. Then as we begin the next sprint, we can have our test team execute the automated test scripts to ensure the system is working as expected. So we continue to iterate through this process from sprint to sprint and from one epic to another until we are ready to formally validate our release. At that point, we can then verify and formally baseline our functional spec and run formal end-to-end system testing with our automated scripts. Once that's completed and our development summary reports are approved, we can then begin formal user acceptance testing. Following this approach allows us to iterate through different key features, receive user feedback, and perform incremental testing, while at the same time adhering to our formal SDLC. A key advantage of this approach is that since we are incrementally working on the regulatory documentation throughout our progression, the final documents are a much better product in the end. Additionally, when we do full reviews of the documents for sign-off, then the stakeholders have much more of a shared understanding. And then UAT tends to go much smoother since the business users have been involved throughout the process. So what about COTS? Commercial off-the-shelf software products are often used in the pharmaceutical industry. However, COTS software, just like anything else, has advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages are they are usually initially more affordable to implement and usually quicker to implement. Plus, you get the benefit of having built-in functionality, which is based on a community of like-minded people who have the same problem to solve. However, common drawbacks are they may have longer-term costs, such as ongoing service payments and additional licensing when adding more users, which can add up over time. There may be less flexibility because certain functions may or may not fully meet your needs, and the vendor may or may not be willing to accommodate them without added costs. And it's completely dependent on the vendor as they are the primary driver behind any changes. And there's also the risk that someday they may simply stop supporting the application altogether. So how do we select a COTS vendor? Up front, we will want to define just the right level of requirements, meaning that we understand enough about the different available products so that the gaps between our user requirements and what's currently available through COTS solutions are known. We perform vendor assessments, participate in vendor demos, and use quantifiable selection criteria to choose the right vendor. We draft a gap assessment and then determine all the estimated implementation costs and the level of effort to close the gaps between what the vendor provides and what is needed. Once the vendor is chosen, then before diving right into the implementation phase, we need to take the time to conduct a series of demos in a sandbox environment with the business, especially on newly added functionality that was requested, to ensure that it meets the business needs. We also need to be prepared to do multiple demos if issues are found, if updates are made based on feedback, or if different groups need to focus on specific features. Additionally, it's a good idea to conduct a hands-on informal conference room pilot with the business prior to moving forward, preferably using real day-in-the-life scenarios. This upfront investment should pay dividends downstream when it really counts when it comes to formal deployment. In our next scenario, we will cover using a COTS product that requires configuration. This scenario involves something that is vendor developed, methodology that the constraints we have is a methodology is to nail down the entire scope of the configuration prior to formal testing. And the challenge may be an expectation for the project team to roll out a major COTS product to a large group of users while following a formal SDLC methodology. When using this approach, we're still working in iterations and we are involving the business stakeholders along with the core team throughout the process versus just at the end. So while this involves an additional time investment on the front end, it will pay off by reducing risk during the formal validation phase in addition to increasing stakeholder satisfaction level. The key is convincing the vendor to demo progress without having the fully completed functionality. But the upside is that it helps to eliminate the empty feeling that users may otherwise have during development and the frustration they can experience during user acceptance testing when something doesn't work as what they had expected. That said, the challenge with this approach is getting the vendor to commit to sprint cycles if they march to the beat of their own drum when it comes to dates for incorporating requested changes. What can happen is that sprint cycles end up being more of a way to manage project tasks. The drawback to this is that instead of committing to what can get done in a sprint, things that don't get done will often carry over into the next sprint since there's only so much that can be controlled. Therefore, the team can try to incorporate what it can, such as sprint planning, daily stand-ups, and story point estimates. And the last scenario covers a COTS product, which requires a new module. In this scenario, the constraints may be the project's team desire to deploy the entire module in one release, and challenges may be the expectation for the business analyst to receive upfront approval of text-based functional specification before UAT can begin. If incremental development isn't feasible when we're dealing with an external vendor, then it's still possible to leverage Agile principles using models. In this case, requirements tend to be best developed using simple but effective visual models that properly represent a day in the life. The value of requirements models is that they are understandable to both users as well as the vendor, and they help to bridge the communication gap which often exists between the two groups. Then as the models are further refined, the requirements continue to develop as they become clearer. In my own experience, I have found this process to work quite well. One good example I can give is an initiative where we had to add an entirely new module to an existing application. We leveraged 3 sprint cycles, and within each cycle, I had worked with the vendor on putting together a set of use case storyboards. We started with low fidelity mockups, and then by the last sprint, we were using actual screen captures of the solution. While I had put this together in PowerPoint, I also asked the vendor to lead the actual walkthrough with the entire team. This approach was extremely successful with creating collaborative sessions which allowed us to capture good feedback. Accordingly, that project was very successful and resulted in only one iteration of the functional spec with the approving business stakeholder. That's all for this video. For more information about how I can add value as a business analyst in the pharmaceutical industry, please visit my website at hughesitconsulting.com.